Hi everyone, Lisa Haven here, and I've got a bombshell of a report to share with you, and one, quite frankly, that is going to piss you off. Yeah, you're going to be not too happy about this one. Well, with all the talk of World War III underway with Russia and Syria and America and China kind of all in this hodgepodge mix of a massacre, if you will, well, the IMF has taken it upon themselves to issue a document that, in a nutshell, it steals your sovereign freedom, steals your sovereign rights. Not only that, but it will enslave the nation and enforce and push a cashless society. Yeah, no joke. Let me just take you straight to the IMF document here so you can see it for yourself. All right, so here it is. You can see IMF working paper, and working paper means this is something that they're planning on implementing, and they're just taking the steps to what they're going to do beforehand and how to enforce a cashless society. They want to decash every nation member of the IMF. And let me just show you that list, kind of backtracking here. Here's all the countries that are nation members. You can see the US, we joined in 1945, but the entire list is on a link below that I will leave here for all you guys to see so you can check that. But that's it in a nutshell. All right, so back to the document here, and it's only 26 pages, so it's not that huge, but it is a working paper that is the research to basically implement a cashless society. Let's just go the opening paragraph here because I think it holds some important information. But they're saying this is to encourage the debate on a cashless society. Well, there's no debate. We already know that people of the Bilderberg organization have pushed the idea that they wanted a cashless society. And look, they're heading full-fledged into this. And if World War III were to be sparked, I wonder if they would implement something like this. At the lick of a dime, if you will, but it could come quick. But it says, the paper, which you're about to see, presents a simple framework for the analysis of the macroeconomic implications of DeCashing, forcing a cashless society. That's what that means. Defined as replacing our paper currency with convertible deposits, DeCashing would affect all key macroeconomic sectors. The overall macroeconomic impact of DeCashing would depend on the balance of growth enhancing and growth constraining factors. Starting from a traditional saving investment balance, the paper develops a four-sector macroeconomic framework. It is purely illustrative and is designed to provide a roadmap for a systematic evaluation of DeCashing, which means it's the way, it's the path to get a cashless society. The framework is disaggregated into the real, fiscal, monetary, and eternal sectors, and potential implications of DeCashing are then identified in each sector. Finally, the paper draws a balance on possible positives and negatives. Let me just say there's a bunch of negatives, but you get that in a nutshell. All right, so here's kind of all the headlines. You could pause that. I'm not going to focus on that because there's a lot to go through, but the entire paper is done on points. I believe it gets all the way up into the 50s. And so I'm just going to read some of these headlines to you. But number one, DeCashing is defined as the gradual phasing out of currency from circulation and its replacement with convertible deposits. So the initiative does not in any way target the abolition of money as an institution, but rather make it all electronic, if you will, a sweeping reduction of the role of currency, its cash component, in favor of transferable deposits, its non-cash component. So in a nutshell, no more cash, no more tangible, because the government wants to control everything that you see, hear, touch, and do. Not necessarily just the government, but the globalists and the elite pulling the strings from behind the scenes. All right, moving on. They say the purpose is to not to take a favor for or against, but to push the ongoing debate. Well, I beg to differ because it is taking a pro stance on decashing the society. So moving on to number 5, cash is still used around the world. Cash remains popular for technical and symbolic reasons. These are just some of the headlines here. The use of cash differs depending on the denomination. Large denomination banknotes pose institutional risks. So these are reasons now that they want to implement this thing. Cashless transactions have also gained importance across the world. The authorities of many countries have already taken the initial steps to limit cash in transactions. Now, this is one that's important because they put caps. Like you have a cap on how much you can spend a day in your bank account. Well, they're imposing, later on, you'll see that they want to put limits on what you can and can't take to certain places, or how much you can withdraw or can't withdraw. That's called a society controlled by people pulling the strings. When they're telling you you can and can't do this without legal red tape, that's ultimate control. And that's what this is all about. It's about controlling you, how much money you have, and what you do with your cash. And you know what? Knowing the CIA and the WikiLeaks vaults that have just dropped, I guarantee you that a program is going to come out in which they can wipe your bank at the lick of a dime. And I said that once before. I don't even know if that's a statement, but needless to say, they can wipe it clear in a minute, and you'd have no cash. I mean, we're talking like Hollywood style kind of stuff here. Moving on, cash economics primer. Now, there's not a lot in this section, so I'm just going to skip over that one for sake of time, but you can come back to it. All right, the next section here is macroeconomic framework. And this is just some of how it will work. It says one way to look at macroeconomic implications of decashing is through the prism of the System of National Accounts, SNA. And they've actually got a whole diagram here on supply and demand, how it's going to look, and a little bit of that detail there. If you're a charts kind of person, you can look into that a little bit more. But let me just scroll down to this last section here. How does it enter into the simple framework? Well, they say on a purely macro accounting level, commitments taken by countries in the process of decashing directly affect their saving investment balances. The impulse may originate in any of the 4 sectors from the variables shown in the figure you just saw. In the real sector, decashing would directly influence private consumption and private investment, that's us, generally by shifting the means of payments from paper to electronic means. No more cash. There's your admittance there. In the fiscal sector, the impact of decashing would be felt on both the revenue and the expenditure sides. On the revenue side, the level of non-tax revenue for governments from seigniorage, which seigniorage, let me just show you, it means profit made by government who issues that currency, will also be inevitably affected. So you can read a little more on that section if you want, but that's kind of how they're going to do the framework on that. All right, so this next section here, monetary effects. This says on number 27, the initial macroeconomic impulse of decashing would originate, it's going to start from a drop in demand for currency. Now, it goes on to say that basically in the most probable scenario of creating incentives for decashing, which means they want to give the public incentives to get rid of their cash, because ultimately it's more control and more money in the hands of, well, the globalist. More taxes, more tax control, if you will. But the public sector most likely would reduce its demand for currency more than the private sector. For example, if a decision is taken to pay all public sector salaries by cashless means, i.e. By their transfer of two deposits of public employees and to pay taxes only with cashless means, the private sector may also react to incentives for decashing if the authorities introduce a requirement that all payments exceeding such amount, whatever that amount is, should be made by cashless means. In any case, the rebalancing in monetary accounts would be purely mechanical with no impact on money supply. Yeah, interesting thing there. Now, then they go on to list and say DeCashing could help improve the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. The only people that a cashless society is going to benefit is you, the deep state, and those ruling from behind the scenes. Pretty much no one else, in my opinion. After DeCashing, the banking system laden with fresh deposits of your cash would be able to boost lending. No, that's not true, in my opinion. You don't have to have it all done a certain way. Why would they be able to boost lending? Think about this for a moment. If you're forced to put everything into this cashless society, well, now who has more money? The central banks, the world banks, all the banks across the country. We've just given banks, International Monetary Fund, after all, IMF, more power by saying, why don't you control all my money? So this is how they're able to lend. But I can guarantee you that the lending in the future is not going to be what it is today, because if they have all this power, well, talk about some crazy rates when you borrow money, if you will. 31, the only useful function of currency which can be lost with DeCashing is that demand for cash may help predict financial crisis. This one's interesting. So never mind the fact that they're giving so much power to these banks, but the only thing they're going to lose is that cash may help predict financial crisis. Okay, let me read this one. This one's interesting. Such crises usually happen when the general public loses confidence in banks and bank money. No kidding. And run into hard cash erroneously viewed as a safe haven. I don't see how that's erroneous, but needless to say. The strong demand for cash in September 2008 reflected the panic that swept across the most developed countries with the visible onset of one of the biggest crises in history, the rise in demand for currency. In particular, for high denomination banknotes was mainly due to an increase in precautionary holdings by people concerned about the liquidity or solvency of financial institutions. Yeah, because they shouldn't, they're not perfect. Let me just put it that way. However, it is not entirely clear whether DeCashing would eliminate the ability to see clear warning signs. Well, at least they admit it. Even in a fully cashless society, people might revert to gold or other commodities. This is why I tell everyone gold and silver are a good idea, especially if they're planning on going cashless and something of that effect. Imagine, there's no more run on banks, if you will, because now they control it all and you get nothing. Number 32, finally, DeCashing may have implications for central bank independence, mainly in emerging economics. I guess that could pretty much be summed up: more money in the hand of the bankers and less with the government, I guess. Maybe something of that nature. All right, next section here, real effects. I'm going to just skip this section here, but you can go back. It's just a brief one there. But moving on to the next part here. In principle, DeCashing should improve tax collection. Oh, doesn't that make you smile ear to ear? But anyway, yeah, this is going to help the government take more of your taxes. Yeah, it's going to reducing tax invasion. I think that one speaks for itself. You can go back and read it. The magnitude of possible improvements in tax collection is hard to estimate. No, because improvements would happen across the board, because that's what this is all about. Collecting money, having the government know everything about you. Screw that. I'm sorry. They don't need to know everything about me. They don't need to know every dot and tittle of what I do. If I want to have cash, I can use cash. If I don't want someone to track me because I go and make a transaction and the government knows, oh, you used your card, now we know exactly where you're at. Okay, sometimes cash is a must, and I think doing away with it is obviously a very, very bad idea. All right, okay, moving on. Balance of payments effects. I'm going to skip this section here as well, but you can go back. Structural effects. Now this one's a riot. Number 46, decashing can lead to increased financial inclusiveness. Decashing will help reduce illegal migration. Woo! Phew. With less currency in circulation, employers that attract illegal immigration by cash payments would have fewer options to pay for their services off the books and more regulation on you. More taxes in their pocket. That one can be summed up. Number 48, decashing can help improve the environment. Because, Agenda 21, we need to just make the environment better. So we need to have a cashless society for the children and for the children's future, because money is, it's trash and it's green and it takes trees. Oh, we're just in trouble here. So because cash uses trees and it's paper money, you see how many trees we can save if we implement this bad boy? Yeah, that's the agenda that I think we're going to see in the future. For the sake of the children, let's implement a cashless society to make us green. How many liberals do you think would be on board, the libtard kind? I think an awful lot would be. Number 49. However, social implications of decashing can be substantial. Yeah. Carrying cash is a human right and is written into constitutions. Really? You think? Which therefore have to be what? Changed. So, in order to implement your society, they want to change the American Constitution specifically here. Yep, not my words, but those right here for you. Social conventions may also be disrupted, as decashing may be viewed as a violation of a fundamental right. Yep, including freedom of contract and freedom of ownership. Yep. While convertible deposits cannot be stolen in a conventional robbery, they can be hacked. Really. So there's that concern as well. Decashing would remove a tactic means of social support. And finally, currency substitution can become quite possible. Now here's the next one, the conclusions and policy option. This is a huge one. Decashing by a shift towards transferable deposits reflects a natural drive towards economic flexibility and growth. It should be seen as a long-term project and does not suggest an immediate move into cashless society. Okay, don't worry, it's coming in the future, just not today. Although some countries most likely will decash in a few years, basically on their own, going completely cashless would be phased in steps, meaning they're not going to do it all at once. They never do. It's the slow boil of the frog. You put a frog in boiling water and it will stay there until it dies, the more you heat it up. The decashing process could build on the initial and largely uncontested steps, such as phasing out large denomination bills. We're talking, let's phase out the big $100 bills and stuff first, and then move on from there. Do you see how that works? The placement of ceilings on cash transactions sounds like something we already have in play. So, you're only allowed to use this much a day. If you use more than that a day, then you need the approval of your bank, because there you go, Big Daddy pulling your little strings. And then kiss my, what. Keister, and the reporting of cash moves across the border. In other words, you can't take any cash across the border. Further steps could include, or you can, but obviously limited. Further steps would also include creating economic incentives to reduce the use of cash in transactions. So if you don't use cash, they'll give you a little incentive until they take it all. See, but then the incentive will eventually go away, simplifying the opening and use of transferable deposits and further computerizing the financial system. 52. And these are the big ones. These two are probably the biggest on the whole thing, but the private sector led decashing system preferable to the public sector led decashing. So they want to start with the private sector, but the former seems almost entirely benign, more use of mobile phones to pay for coffee, etc., but still needs policy adaptation. The latter seems more questionable, and people may have valid objections to it. I have objections to both. Decashing of either kind leaves both individual and states more vulnerable to disruptions, ranging from power outages to acts to cyber warfare. In any case, the tempting attempts to impose a decashing by a decree should be avoided, given The popular personal attachment to cash. Yeah. A targeted outreach program is needed to alleviate suspicion related to DeCashing. In particular, that by DeCashing, the authorities are trying to control all aspects of people's lives, including their use of money, or push personal savings into banks. You know what? Here's the thing. That's kind of the agenda here. That's the truth. So they're saying we need to make that that's not what they're trying to do, even though that's exactly what they're trying to do. The DeCashing process would acquire more traction if it were based on individual consumer choice and cost benefits considerations. All right, moving on. The macroeconomic impact of DeCashing would depend on the balance of its costs and benefits, but most likely will still be positive on a net basis. 55 on the side of the cost, DeCashing may create temporary friction. You think? Yeah, I think it's going to be a little more than temporary. And finally, coordination efforts on DeCashing could help enhance its positive effects and reduce potential cost. But there's all the references on that. There you have it. A complete cashless society is obviously something that is not off the table, but is very much on the table right now. And imagine if something were to happen and we were to go into some kind of war. Look, which countries push war in order to help the economy? Could the IMF jump in at that time and say, hey, we got everything under the making. We're ready to go with this cashless society thing? Well, biblically speaking, we know that, the mark of the beast in the future kind of requires a cashless society, if you will, because you cannot buy, sell, or trade without the mark. So these are some things that we could be looking at in the very, very, very near future. But either way, I wanted to bring you and show you that document so you have it. Well, if you like what you heard today, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and give me a big fat like if you like what you heard. There's a lot of attacks right now with YouTube and Google and everything. It's just kind of going nutty here. So subscribe and share it on all your social media outlets. So with that, please also don't forget to check out my partner at getthetea.com. Look, he's got the most effective and most powerful tea detox, just detox in general. I've never had anything like this. I've never heard anybody say anything negative about it because it works. It's small and mighty, and the price, I think, is right on, but it helps reduce acid reflux, indigestion, gets rid of chemicals, parasites, bacteria, toxins, chemtrail yourself using these life change teas. So you can get that at getthetea.com. Also, prepare for what the IMF and what could play out in biblical prophecy with food storage. Look, we need to be ready to go with food preparation. It's a must in today's day and age. So I use foodforliberty.com/haven. They work with Luana here, and they've got some of the greatest food. I've tried it and I love it, and great stuff. So make sure you go to foodforliberty.com/haven and get prepared for whatever the world throws your way in the very near future, especially with the tension between Syria and Russia right now. Well, thanks again for tuning in. This is Lisa Haven, signing out.